China has identified the cause of the
mysterious new virus.
Coronavirus.
There are fears a rapidly spreading virus has reached Australia.
This is a rapidly emerging situation.
Where there are cases, the government can quickly implement targeted measures and focus control efforts where they're needed most.
Together in collaboration with the pharmaceutical companies,
we need vaccines to immunize ourselves.
And then the final solution, which is a year to 2 years off, is the vaccine.
The answer to that is to really close things down.
Hello, and welcome back to The Abstract. I know I haven't put out a new episode in a while, but please forgive me. And as you can see, we're not doing the personal intro thing anymore where I sit outside and you see my face and all that. I'm ditching that. It was kind of extra. We're going to just dive right into the information here. So today, we're looking at the coal fly ash and fluoride connections. And, there were some references to fluoride, at least one in my book already. And so that was actually a lead that we're following up on here today. And just if you're not familiar with my work, in my book, we look at the evidence provided by Marvin Herndon and Dr. Whiteside pertaining to the fact that we are being sprayed with a substance that is most commonly coal fly ash. Coal fly ash is the ash that rises from burning coal. It's the smoke from burning coal. And there are these similarities between how we're being sprayed with this coal fly ash substance and how people are drinking fluoride in their drinking water. Of course, I don't drink fluoride in my drinking water. I have a reverse osmosis system. They do fluoridate in my area, but I take it out with the reverse osmosis, and I hope you are fortunate enough to not drink fluoride as well, because it is highly toxic. And but anyway, this phenomenon of spraying us with a industrial waste byproduct, coal fly ash, is similar to how they put fluoride in the water. Fluoride is a industrial waste byproduct of many industries, not just the phosphate mining industry in Florida, but that is the main source of the fluoride that we get in our drinking water. Anyway, let's and we're going to look into the other sources of fluoride here as we go along in the article. But most interestingly, this article brings up deeper and darker connections between fluoride and chemtrails. And oddly enough, these connections pertain to the original Manhattan Project. As I think most big science, if not all big science started with the original World War II Manhattan Project. So it appears that, all of these gigantic scams have originated, scientific scams, have originated out of the original World War II Manhattan Project. So let's begin. And they both fluoride and coal fly ash, byproducts of heavy industry. And these global corporations can apparently sell both of these products. We know that they sell fluoride to put in the water, but we're assuming that they sell the coal fly ash to be sprayed as chemtrails. It's their idea of turning lemons into lemonade. Sort of this perverse, twisted version of turning lemons into lemonade, but that's what big corporations and the Illuminati and the deep state and all these people behind it are known for. So, in my book, we talk about how there's a whistleblower from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, named Craig Davis. He originally blew the whistle to geoengineeringwatch.org, Dane Wigington up there in Shasta. And there's an article about that. I have it on the screen right now. And he originally stated that the fluoride in the water works synergistically with other environmental toxins. Specifically, he noted chemtrails, that the chemtrails that we breathe in work synergistically to become much more deadly inside our bodies with the fluoride that we're drinking, or if you're drinking fluoride. And this synergistic effect between environmental toxins and fluoride was also mentioned in Christopher Bryson's book, The Fluoride Deception. And most of this article is based on Bryson's book, The Fluoride Deception. It's kind of like a combination of Bryson's book and my book, so that we can make connections here. And so, these are very interesting prima facie connections. So these were the things that I originally started looking at, saying to myself, there's got to be more there. It's too serendipitous here. This is extremely highly analogous, both of these things, the way they're spraying us with chemtrails and putting fluoride in our drinking water. So I had to look no further than Bryson's book. It's called The Fluoride Deception. And what I found were these connections back to the original Manhattan Project. So let's get into those under the heading of Fluoride and the original Manhattan Project in my paper, now up and running on activistpost.com. And we have the original Manhattan Project required massive amounts of fluorine. They were using it in this process of gaseous diffusion. This is how one of the methods that they used to enrich the the uranium. Yes, it was always either uranium or plutonium. In this case, it was uranium that they were refining using the gaseous diffusion method. Bryson wrote quite an eloquent paragraph in his book about what the gaseous diffusion method is. So let me just read this one paragraph from Bryson. Bryson writes, Manhattan Project scientists were planning to use a, quote, gaseous diffusion technology to refine uranium. In that process, uranium is mixed with elemental fluorine, forming a volatile gas called uranium hexafluoride, which is then enriched by diffusing that gas through a fine barrier or membrane. The lighter molecules containing fissionable uranium needed for a nuclear explosion pass through the membrane more quickly and are captured on the other side. But because only a handful of the lighter molecules make it through the membrane each time, many hundreds of tons of fluorine and thousands of stages of progressive enrichment would be needed to produce enough uranium for a single atomic bomb, unquote. So fluorine is the element. That's more of that's a pure thing. The byproduct that came out of this process was fluoride. And actually, I do use those terms interchangeably in this paper as Bryson does in his book. But fluoride was a toxic waste byproduct of the gaseous diffusion method. So they ended up with just tons and tons of this stuff, massive amounts of it. And they knew it was toxic. They didn't know what to do with it. So there was that question: what do you do with all this toxic waste from the production of the atomic bombs? But that was not the only issue. The workers at the atomic bomb plants where the gaseous diffusion method was practiced were falling ill and dying due to, guess what? Fluoride poisoning. And there were some legal challenges to the Manhattan Project during the war relating to the workers who had been exposed and were falling ill and dying. And so in 1946, that's 1 year after they dropped the bomb, the testing responsibilities for exposure to fluoride were transferred from the Food and Drug Administration to the Army's Chemical Warfare Service. And of course, once that was done, well, there was no more problem, but not really. They just covered it up. They said, oh no, don't worry about it, no problem here. You know, like we haven't heard this story before. This is standard operating procedure for the government. Sweep it under the rug, make it go away, just be completely irresponsible. And not only were the factory workers being adversely impacted by the fluoride, people living in communities near the factories were being poisoned. I mean, this was a gigantic problem. You got mounds of toxic waste, you got your workers, you got people surrounding the factories falling ill. So this fact that the fluoride was contaminating the communities around the factories is known as environmental fluoride pollution. And so there was this huge problem arising from the original Manhattan Project pertaining to fluoride, but also, not only that, fluoride gases are produced during the production of petroleum, bricks, leather, steel, glass, and plastics. It's a staple of American industrial society. And there is also, we should note that fluoride is a constituent of coal fly ash. When they burn coal, the smoke that rises from the coal, one of the molecules that you will find in coal fly ash is fluoride. And they were burning a lot of coal at steel and aluminum plants as well as coal-fired power plants. So there you go. I mean, fluoride is huge. It is a huge problem in our society, an extremely toxic substance that is produced in many, many industrial activities, and most importantly at the time, it was produced from the making of atomic bombs, because after the war, this was the Cold War, right? And it wasn't like they dropped the bombs on Japan and then said, oh, okay, that's it, all right, boys, go on home, did a good job, see you next time, or whatever, won't see you again, took care of that, job done, over. No, they expanded the program. This was the Cold War. They started building the hydrogen bombs and other types of bombs, but all of this required more fluoride waste for the refinement of the nuclear materials that they needed for the bombs. And so this problem was big and getting bigger. And Bryson writes that this fluoride pollution was, quote, the biggest single legal worry facing the atomic bomb program following World War II. Bryson also writes that, quote, fluoride has been the nation's most damaging air pollutant and almost certainly its most expensive. And we have, again, the federal government in 1957. They lost a court case pertaining to people being harmed by fluoride, and then they just turn off the monitors monitoring ambient fluoride. Again, they're trying to sweep things under the rug, make the problem go away, but the problem was too big. And so, how do you solve this problem, right? How do you get rid of this toxic waste? How do you make people believe that they're actually not being harmed? How do you maintain that facetious argument? Am I using that word correctly there? Anyway, let's go on. Well, the answer to those questions is, guess what? Water fluoridation. It was all originally funded by the large corporations that stood the most to gain. And I just name a few of them here. It was mostly the big metal producers, specifically aluminum producers, but the few that I name here, a couple of them have something to do with the new Manhattan Project. So the ones I name here are Monsanto, U.S. Steel, Alcoa, and DuPont. Monsanto and DuPont. I have named in my book, and there are interesting connections. There's kind of a little too far to stretch into those connections right now. I want to stay focused on fluoride and coal fly ash, but those are in my book, and I do have a index in the back of the book if you want to look those up. But yeah, it was all funded by giant corporations, and they were funding studies at the Mellon Institute in the mid to late 1930s, scientific studies that were skewed. I don't even have to read them to know that they were skewed. Challenge me on that. But they were all skewed to promote fluoride in drinking water. They, said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's safe. There's no problem. It's good for you. Good for teeth, good for kids, good for everything." Oh gosh, I shouldn't probably mention this, but I remember when, if you're really familiar with my work, I knew a Warburg. His name was actually Felix, but everybody called him Peter. And I mentioned fluoridated water one time to him, and his immediate response was, "Yeah, it's good for babies." At the time, I was already hip to how toxic it was, and started seeing it in the baby water at the big box retailers and stuff, and sort of turns my stomach. But let's proceed here. So, as the establishment is going about mollifying these concerns about fluoride toxicity, there emerged this man he became the main guy in the scientific promotion of water fluoridation in America and the world. His name was Dr. Harold Hodge. He was a professor at the University of Rochester, New York. And guess what? He was the former chief toxicologist of the original Manhattan Project. And Rochester, where he was a professor, became the hub for drinking water fluoridation in America and, as I say, in the rest of the world. And Hodge went on to train a generation of dental school deans in the 1950s and 1960s who unanimously advocated for the practice. So they have their point man here, Dr. Hodge. And some things that he didn't bother to mention to his colleagues was that he had investigated fluoride poisoning of atomic bomb factory workers, as well as the poisoning of people living nearby during the Manhattan Project. And, I think we know what he found. We know what happened there. People died. They were harmed and killed by exposure to fluoride. So I know he can interpret that in any way he likes, but the fact remains. And he basically obfuscated his entire past from his colleagues as much as he could. I guess some of them maybe knew that he worked on the original Manhattan Project. Some of them maybe even knew what capacity he worked on it in, but he did his best to cover that up. This is all documented in Bryson's book. And so his work at the University of Rochester, again, was backed by these giant corporations, mostly metal producers, and then most notably for our discussion, Monsanto and DuPont. And it's also interesting that before the war, Hodge was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And if you've read my book, we have lots and lots of evidence linking the spraying of chemtrails to the Rockefeller family and the Rockefeller Foundation. So I encourage you to look up those connections in my book. It's a little too much of a stretch to go into here. But let's continue with the coal fly ash and fluoride connection. Hodge he had extremely low ethics. I know he looks good in the picture there. Looks like a decent man. Look at him with his hair all combed, and he looks like he's all got it together. Well, he was injecting unsuspecting people with plutonium and uranium during the war and after. These are just experiments, don't you know? I mean, it sounds like Nazi experiments to me. But that's what he was doing. Injecting people with plutonium and uranium without their knowledge or consent. Harold Hodge. #1 point man on water fluoridation in America and the world. This is who we're listening to. And in 1969, Hodge eventually became a professor emeritus at the UCSF Medical School. This is the University of California at San Francisco, which is sort of unnerving to me. I know that hospital pretty well. My dad died there. Anyway, but that's good because I can, he might have some files that I can maybe look up there. I can get there really easily. As you may know, I'm in San Rafael, California, which is just to the north of San Francisco. I know San Francisco like the back of my hand. And so what was most important to this move to legitimize water fluoridation, as far as Hodge's work is concerned, was that when they had this big establishment push legitimizing fluoride in drinking water, this served to inoculate the big fluoride producers from legal liabilities. You see, if the government and all these scientists, and I guess they were winning some court cases they could point to as well. It was kind of a battle for a while. But the forces of the establishment they were establishing this legal precedent through all these studies and you know, their armies of lawyers and public relations and all this kind of stuff. They made it appear as though something highly toxic was not. They made it appear as though water fluoridation is good for you, when of course we know that it is not. But that's what his work effectively did for the establishment, and specifically for these big fluoride producers, these big corporations. It lessened any and all legal liabilities. That's basically what they did. You know, their cover was like, no, we're trying to do something good for humanity. Don't you see? We love you. You know, no, really the whole thing was to cover up the extreme toxicity of fluoride. And I mean, this is a psychopathic program to cover up this psychopathy, to cover up this mass murder. That's what they were doing. And then we had, in order to more effectively do this, Edward Bernays was hired to promote water fluoridation. And Bryson writes, quote, medical professionals critical of fluoride were regularly mauled in the press, while doctors and dentists were expelled from their professional organizations for anti-fluoride heresy. And then Bryson writes again, quote, while millions of taxpayer dollars were spent promoting fluoridation, little money was given to the study of potentially harmful effects from fluoride. You see how that works? That's how the establishment rams things right down your throat. And we got it all here, and that's what they're doing with chemtrails. You know, they have these geoengineers and their big geoengineering department, and they have public relations, and they're holding events, and they're putting out papers, and they're like, yeah, we're going to spray you with toxic materials. It's good for you. I mean, you got David Keefe coming on the late night Colbert show talking about how spraying sulfuric acid from airplanes is a good thing. I mean, it's just, you know, it's kind of like saying taking a loaded shotgun and pointing it at your head and pulling the trigger is a good thing. I mean, it's just total insanity. But this is what they're doing. And they're trying to make you believe that an apple is an orange and an orange is an apple, as usual. An inversion of reality. And that's what big science does. They've been acting in a psychopathic manner for decades and decades and decades. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised. Anyway, that's what I've found as far as the coal fly ash fluoride connection is concerned, and I will see you on the next one.